Hello.
Good. So what I'm just going to put 4 photos. That's okay.
Okay, thank you, Jad, for that introduction. And it's very nice to see everybody here at MDLAB. This is a wonderful opportunity for me every summer to come here to Beirut and be able to share some new ideas and speak with the participants of this great program. This is my 7th trip now to Beirut, so I almost feel like it's kind of a second home to me. I've also known Jad for too many years, but we've had a wonderful time together, building programs, thinking about different, thinking about our academic work and media literacy and how we can build it and how we can grow the field and help bring media literacy into places where it's needed. So with that, it's great to see everybody here, and I hope you had a wonderful trip here and that you've settled in nicely. My talk today for everyone is going to be on this topic of civic media literacies. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself first and some of my positions so you see where I come from and what I'm doing. As Jad mentioned, I'm a professor at Emerson College. Emerson College is in Boston, Massachusetts. It's in the middle of Boston, Massachusetts, right on the Common. And the whole school is almost the size of LAU. It's 6,000 students, and it's devoted entirely to media and arts. It has one school of the arts and one school of communication. I sit in the School of Communication in the journalism department, where I teach things like civic media, digital media and culture, and media literacy. I also started a graduate program in civic media, art, and practice at Emerson. We are now in our 3rd year of this graduate program, and it's a 12-month program where the students come in and they actually do theses with communities, building media and technologies to help communities solve problems they have. So it's a little bit of a different way we approach the topic of media literacy. And then I work in a research lab at Emerson, and as Jad mentioned, I direct and chair the project in Salzburg, the Salzburg Academy on Media and Global Change. I think you saw some videos about that earlier this morning and heard about it, and we welcome you to inquire more. Salzburg Academy and MDLAB are kind of like sister programs. We work very closely together. We have different approaches, but we have the same mission in mind, and that's to build capacity of media literacy in the world. So if there's any of this that interests you, I'm happy to talk to you after, or if you're interested in any more of this work, please let me know. So what I'd like to do with our opening keynote today is try to give you some ideas and some approaches to media literacy that I've been thinking about for the last few years. These are part, as Jad mentioned, of a new book that's coming out next month under this title, Civic Media Literacies, Reimagining Human Connection in an Age of Digital Abundance. And this book, it comes out next month. This idea, I want to talk about the story of where this book came from and the ideas that are embedded in this. And it's actually, some of these ideas are critical of the way that we think about media literacy. They're critical of some of the current definitions of media literacy, and they focus on the subtitle there. So how do we think about human connection in an age when these technologies and media have become so ubiquitous and they've become such a core part of our lives, that how do we understand and think about human connection in this age, and what are some of the ways we can help teach young people and citizens to use media in ways that reinforce the values of connecting as humans. So that's what this book is about. It took me a couple years to put it together, so that's why it's really nice to see this. It looks pretty. This is, I'm happy how it came out. So, okay, so I'm going to do this. At certain points, I'll engage and ask some questions, and I hope this gives you a nice foundation for the next 2 weeks of MDLAB. So this book starts from a question and a story I'll talk to you about. This is a question that I was getting asked often in the United States. If you look at, you probably heard of the election we had in 2016, and it was a very polarizing election, and it was very, it started a wave of kind of partisanship and a wave of incivility, not only in the United States, but also in countries around the world. You saw increasing partisanship, you saw technologies being used to divide as much as they were to connect. You saw different political parties, populist parties, come in to gather more and more of contingent around policies that seemed alternative to the principles of engagement that we're normally used to, at least in the United States and some of the other countries where I work. And so I was getting phone calls from media and news outlets and organizations and professors asking me quite often if this idea of media literacy has failed. If we have more media literacy, then why are people believing in fake news? Then why are people saying things that are harmful to other people? Then why are people being more aggressive and polarizing online? And so I started to try to answer these questions through a reasoned discussion of like, well, you know, there's a lot of reasons why we think media literacy might have failed. Perhaps we haven't done a good enough job teaching people. Perhaps young people need to learn how to deconstruct media more. If they could figure out truth from false information, they'll be better equipped to respond. So I kept saying this to myself for a year or two, or for a month or two, and then I realized that perhaps the way that we've been thinking about media literacy has not been keeping pace with the way that our technologies and our societies have evolved. And so this kind of became a core question to me, not as media literacy failed, because I don't think that's the right question. I put this up here to be provocative, but to question what are the most valuable things we can understand about the way we use media to engage meaningfully in our communities? What are the most meaningful ways that we think about media practices as being helpful to our societies? And what in this world of media literacy has been successful and not successful? So through that story, I realized what I'm going to take you through today is is to show you guys examples and give you case studies of phenomenons in digital culture that I think media literacies are not keeping pace with, and then to put forward an approach to media literacy, or perhaps approach to media and civic engagement, that I think we might want to prioritize in terms of having impactful value to our communities. So I'm going to set this, I know Jad gave you some traditional frameworks and approaches to media literacy, and I'm not going to spend too much time defining that, because I think we had some foundations this morning. What I want to do is talk a little bit about the things that media literacy prioritizes, and then talk about why I don't think these are maybe most relevant to us. So traditional media literacy prioritizes five main approaches. These are 5 approaches that I think are actually not keeping pace with digital society. So critical distance. So normally when we think about how we should read and understand media, we always think that we should observe it as neutrally as possible, or we should be able to deconstruct and analyze messages appropriately. I don't think critical distance is possible in an age of ubiquitous technology, and I'll share that with you in a little bit. Skill attainment. Media literacies often say, like, as you'll learn in the next 2 weeks, if you learn how to create media, or if you learn how to deconstruct media, or if you learn how to better understand the intentions of advertisements or political messages, then you'll be able to respond more. I think that's appropriate, but I don't think that's realistic in terms of how we use media and how we engage with media in our daily lives. Deficit focused. Oftentimes when we think about our use of media, this is a very human thing we do, but we often point out how media doesn't work. When media does something wrong, when it manipulates, when it critiques. What I've realized in research over the last few years is when we do that, we become more cynical and less trustworthy of everything, and it doesn't become a way to get over this space of cynicism that helps promote polarization. Media literacies often look at the content of messages, which I think is now less important than the platform with which the content is being delivered. So we can do a great job of saying, look at how Instagram works, or look what Facebook does. It's actually less important to me, the credibility of the content. It's more important the algorithms and the AI of the platforms. And so this is something that we'll talk about in a little bit. And lastly, for me, which is perhaps the most important idea in my critique of media literacy, is that we often look at media literacy as an individual responsibility. If you learn how better to use media and to critique and create media, you're better prepared to engage. If you know how to deconstruct or analyze or evaluate and reflect on media, then you'll be better positioned in society. I actually think that whole goal of this individual orientation for media literacy, instead of talking about it as a collective or a communal approach to thinking about how we use media, individual responsibility becomes, it leads to more of the division than it does to together. It leads us to saying, I can do this, I know how to critique a message. I know how to create and edit and put something together. That these things lack values, and because they lack values, they almost are as powerful for people who are inciting divisions and inciting polarization as they are for people who are working to better their communities. And so what I think is we actually have a value problem in our media literacy work, that all of these things, we've been doing this work for decades and decades now, building capacity. We haven't really seen reform in our media systems or in the way that people use the media. We've actually seen it become more polarizing. So that's a long way to saying that the media literacy movement as it's currently formed has been unable to respond directly to the emerging digital ecosystem for information. This is kind of the thesis that I'm going to present to you, and now I'm going to take you through some of the structural reasons why. But this is my whole idea. This movement we have about let's give people the power to use media, to create media, to deconstruct media, that this movement actually hasn't kept pace with this digital ecosystem. And because of this lag, we have, I don't think we've met the potential that we could, right? So there are three norms that I'm going to take you through now. So this is the three problem spaces that the book deconstructs. Three specific norms of digital culture are changing our relationship with media. Spectacle, distrust, and what I call agency gaps. So I'm going to take you through these. I'm going to show you some case studies and examples, share some videos with you, ask a few questions of you. And I'm going to talk about these in a context of these are, I think, are norms of a digital ecosystem, and I want us to think hard about the ways in which our media uses and the ways in which we engage with media are understood in the context of these problem spaces, okay? So we'll go through each one of these with examples, and then I will conclude by sharing with you what I think is maybe a perhaps more constructive way that we should think about media literacy. Okay. And if you have questions at any time, please just raise your hand. I'm happy to stop and answer them in these problems. But that's the basic argument. I hope that's clear to everybody. I think that media literacy has been helpful, but it's actually been failing to be responsive. And so I'm going to show you why it's failing. So here's the first term, spectacle, okay? Spectacle is a term that was coined by a French critical theorist, Guy Debord, in the 1960s, when he saw mass media and mass images creating more sensationalized content and distorting the reality for some of the citizens in France of his time. Since then, this concept has been, it comes and goes with media tides. Spectacle, as I see it here, says large-scale digital and social media platforms are now polarized spaces where people are subject to highly personalized information design, sensational content, and sophisticated advertising techniques. So my argument here, as I'll show you in a second, is that spectacle is no longer a device used by the mass media to create a norm, but it's something used by citizens who are media savvy and understand how to leverage technologies for their gain, right? So you guys have seen these things before. I don't have to tell you what these are, right? These are what I call legacy digital networks. This is like, we had these big media conglomerates around the world that owned everything, and now the biggest companies in the world in terms of market revenue are here. They're bigger than oil companies, they're bigger than banks, they exist here. And this has really changed. I want to talk about how this has normalized the spectacular in our life. So I'd like to ask one question. Can someone tell me what the primary motivation for Facebook is? What's the one thing that Facebook does or wants to do? What's their primary thing? Yes? Okay, so build relations with other people. And what was the first part? Sorry? What was the first part of that? Just to build relationships. Yeah, can you say again to the microphone?
Build relations with other people and express myself.
Okay, so that Facebook's primary goal is to have you build relations with other people and express yourself. Okay? Anyone else? Yeah, we have over here.
There are many aspects, like providing practices, like context collapse, and this has got many implications.
Sure.
Some are positive, some are not. The whole structure of Facebook has changed from being a database to a narrative kind of structure. So I tend to get my students to think about the infrastructure, not just the interface of Facebook.
Right.
Because on the surface, connect people.
Yep.
But it is also monetized. It does have some economical implications.
Yes.
As well.
So Facebook is there. There's a lot of nuance to what Facebook does, but their goal, like Facebook's #1 goal, is this idea. You hinted to it. Facebook's #1 goal is what? It's kind of to monetize. I don't know if you want. Yeah, go ahead.
الفيسبوك هو عبارة عن وسيلة من وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، وبالتالي يمكن استخدامه لأكثر من غرض. يمكن استخدامه لنشر ثقافات متعددة، يمكن استخدامه لنشر ثقافة الديمقراطية، يمكن استخدامه لنشر ثقافة حقوق الإنسان، ويمكن أيضا استخدامه كوسائل ألعاب لوسائل ترفيهية، يمكن استخدامه للتجارة، يمكن استخدامه في كل مجالات الحياة.
Okay, thank you. So Facebook has multiple functions. Hold on, we'll get there. It has multiple functions. It can be a connector, it can be nuance, it can be a relation, it can be expressive. There's one thing that Facebook does, prioritizes before any of this, right? And the same thing that Google prioritizes, or Instagram, or Snapchat, YouTube, and Twitter. And the first thing they prioritize is the profit. Before anything else, the #1 thing they need to do is create money. These are not media companies like mass media companies. They are not regulated by any body that oversees the way that they're supposed to. The #1 thing they do is profit. After profit, the next thing they do are all the wonderful things like connect us and build narratives and have context. But before that, they profit. And what's the #1 way in which any of these companies profit? What's the #1 way? Just quick, yeah. What's the #1 way they profit?
Monetizing the experience through ads.
Okay, so they are advertising companies before they're anything else. And how do they monetize their experiences?
Like I know that Facebook, Google, and Instagram, as well as Twitter, monetize the experience by either running ads for companies through pop-up ads or through boosting posts for either individuals or pages that want to reach a higher amount of people.
Right. So so that's a great answer. So they are monetizing posts or boosting ad spaces for people or businesses or anybody who wants to do them, right? And there's two things that happens when these prioritize. They do what? They prioritize the need to have our continued attention, and they prioritize, they need to have our continued attention all the time, and they need to extract our data, right? So I'm saying this now because I think there was a time when these companies were more novel, and they were emerging, and they had these principles of connectivity and collaboration, and they had value, and they still have a lot of value. I'm not saying that they are only evil, they have value. But as anything grows, and as anything grows with little regulation, they become more commodified. So the first thing that happens is they have to profit. And they have to profit by keeping our attention continuously engaged and they have to profit by extracting our data. So this is the context within which these companies exist. The other amazing thing about these companies is that they do this in a way that other companies have. They seamlessly integrate content to do that. So the number one way they want to keep us engaged is what? Giving us content that we implicitly respond to, that we want to share, that we want to express, that we want to comment or like or retweet. And this goes against the first thing of media literacy. We think about access and we think about deconstruction analysis. We don't think about the human implicit list. Like even me, I have to do a career looking at this. And when I go on Facebook, I become implicit. I don't stop and look at stories. I don't start to deconstruct or look for false headlines. If I see something about somebody I don't like, my first reaction is that's bad. And then Facebook gives me something else to look at. And then I say that's good. So these organizations, these technologies are so large, they're so embedded in our daily lives, and they have so seamlessly integrated personal sparks of enjoyment alongside advertising revenue and extraction of data in a way that we don't really know how to respond to. So there's a scholar, Michael Bujega, who talks about, he has a book on like man in the age of the machine, and he talks about we struggle with the rigors of the human condition. Like these technologies have caused us to struggle with the rigors. And what does he mean by the rigors of the human condition? He means the rigors of the values that we need to meaningfully connect to society. We struggle with these rigors of how to meaningfully disagree, how to engage civilly, how to pay attention in dialogue, how to cognitively connect around complexity and embrace it. And he argues that these values have been supplanted by these large technology companies that take so much more of our cognition, so much more of our time continually, that we cope less. And his argument's like we've become more polarizing because we don't know how anymore to stop and engage, because at every moment where complexity or difficulty sets in, we can find refuge in these technologies that keep reaffirming our sense of self-worth and engagement, right? And this is done through something called spectacle, right? Spectacle, the sensational, the more polarized, it fits with our ideologies. A company like Facebook designs us to be in groups with like-minded people, and it promotes content that affiliates with our ideologies and values because it knows that that we're more apt to share and reshare and express that. If 200 of your peers say yes to something and Facebook shows you that, it's been validated for you. And this is really important for us to understand. They're designed this way, right? YouTube, there's been a recent study on YouTube that if you go into YouTube and start clicking on certain political videos, it takes you down this more extreme path. Like the recommendations automate to more extreme information until you get to a space of darkness, but you've done it with millions of people with your same preferences that that make you feel good about what you're watching. And this is all of these technologies. So let me just kind of take you through how this has started and where it ends. So you guys know what this is? I know, thank you for answering that seriously. That was a joke. I'm sure everyone knows what this is. I don't think many people know what that is anymore, actually. That looks like a radio from like another time. I need a better radio picture. So spectacle started with the emergence of the phone, which it actually like inverted how we used to organize our time around media, and now we organize media into our time. It just completely inverted our relationship, our space-time relationship, right? So what happened with the phone was that it became ubiquitous in the way that we told the story, right? So this is just this is in London at an event opening, and I only circle her because she's the only person I could find in this picture that is not trying to immediately capture an event for posterity, right? This was at like a film. We have normalized the need to feel peer validation in spaces where we feel better about ourselves, where we document things and share them to let others know. It's no longer okay to be present. And this is what the rigors of the human condition mean to me. Instead of understanding and being connected in these human spaces, we extract ourselves from them into our technologies. You all know this, right? Like the minute you're alone at least like where I am in Boston, in the subway, the minute that anyone is alone, they pull out a device because it protects them. In fact, I one time did an experiment where I wasn't going to open the phone from one subway till I got to the university, and I think that people looked at me like I was a creep or something. Like I had nowhere to look, and every time like people would look up from their device and see me looking, and they would give me these looks like I was not supposed to do that. I didn't know where to look. So we've kind of normalized this. We've normalized this this mode of engagement. Okay, so I'm gonna continue on. We know that we've normalized this, right? So I want to talk about how this moves on, and then show you guys a few examples of videos that might elaborate on this. So there was a recent article done on Spectacle. So before, when these were novel technologies and we used them passively, then it became super commodified. Things like Facebook started to get in trouble because you could see that they were manipulating their algorithm to focus more on like-minded groups and polarizing content. And then a couple of former employees of these companies came out and wrote a report called "Our Minds Can Be Hijacked," where they actually started to say tech companies exploit human vulnerabilities to keep people hooked, manipulating when people receive likes for their posts, ensuring they arrive when an individual is likely to feel vulnerable or in need of approval. There's no ethics. A company paying Facebook to use its levers of persuasion could be a business targeting tailored advertisements, or it could be a Moscow-based troll farm seeking to gain voters, right? So this became where things got intentional. And I want to talk about how this has worked, how it's scaled from Facebook being this thing that kind of connects us to being a thing that might be more harmful. So does anyone know who this is? Okay, we all know this is Pepe. Does anyone know where Pepe comes from?
He's an artist. He's a comic book artist who created him. That's now he wants to destroy the
Right. So this is Pepe. So Pepe the Frog is there's the guy, Matt Fury, who created him. And I'll just talk to you about how Pepe gets embedded into the Facebook space. So Pepe was a frog created in 2008. I've always wanted to talk about frogs during a presentation, so now I have an opportunity. Pepe was a frog created by a comic book, an artist, Matt Fury, and he became a very popular, this was the comic, it was Boys Club, and that's Pepe, in 2008, and he became very popular. He was like the American stoner frog. He would eat pizza all day. He was just a college graduate. He didn't know what he was doing. And he became really popular in places like 4chan and Reddit as they grew, right? He was this really popular comic. And he was cruising along very nicely until, and he became like an icon, right? Like people like, what's her name? Famous, I don't know why, my daughters know these musicians. These like famous pop stars would retweet Pepe when they were having a bad day, and they would, and he became really popular because of that. He had millions of followers. He was on Twitter saying things, and then once the 2016 election happened, Pepe became appropriated into the culture of the web. So there was a subreddit group, and Reddit is kind of a democratic social news page. There was a subreddit group that got hold of Pepe because they knew he was really popular as like an anti-establishment figure, and they started to appropriate him, and sorry if these images might be offensive, but they started to appropriate him for different reasons. They thought if pop stars and celebrities liked him and more people followed him, then we can also use him to engage in things that we're interested in. And what happened to Pepe was that he started on these Reddit channels, and then he started to get to appropriate him, and then the people who were appropriating him knew that in a culture of spectacle, he was more shareable. So they would start buying Facebook ads, they would start placing him high on the Google searches and getting his images. And then what happened after that, he became more extreme. Like he became more known, and he became more extreme and extreme until these messages started being the norm of what was happening to Pepe. He was put on the top of the list of the Anti-Defamation League in the United States as something that was banned from mass media because of his racist intentions. And this was like a marijuana smoking frog like 2 years ago who became the symbol for the alt-right. And he became, and these were the things that were being passed on, right? What else is crazy about Pepe is that this spectacle culture became appropriated by the politicians. So in the United States, these are pictures that were tweeted and retweeted by then candidate Donald Trump. He put them into his Twitter feed to talk about the support he's getting without having any idea about like the racist and the extremist content with which they were connected to. He just thought that these were really good. So this, to me, shows that spectacle normalizes. It gets put into these systems that prioritize shareable content. Pepe is a meme, a transition of culture. He's seen as something that you can engage with young people. He makes it okay to be more extreme, and then he gets co-opted into these political spaces, and he becomes this symbol. He becomes a symbol of extremism and hate. And the sad thing about Pepe is, before we move on to YouTube, the sad thing about Pepe is that his creator joined with this organization to try to bring him back. They kind of created a death and rebirth as like peace, love, Pepe. And then once that happened, the alt-right folks in the United States just grabbed him back and started making him kill everybody. So I think he's still dead, but we don't know where he is. But the point of that is that these technologies that we think have the potential to be connective and collaborative, and they still do. I don't want to sound like I'm overly critical, because I'll show you later that there are useful spaces for them. But if we just take them as tools to connect alone in a completely commodified space, where the algorithms promote the sensational, and we know that now from enough research, we shouldn't just assume that there are these spaces where collaborative serendipity occurs. We should assume that you can manipulate them to make Pepe into a leading figure for national elections, right? So YouTube as well. I have a colleague, James Cohen, who does a lot of work on this, and I'm sharing a bit from his work now, looking at YouTube as the normalization of spectacle. So we write here, spectacle is normalized most prominently in the YouTube platform, where traditional storytelling and information distribution methods have been commodified, mobilized, and sensationalized. So I'm going to show you two videos now about the evolution of YouTube and the normalization of spectacle, okay? We're going to go through this to kind of talk through why we've become a culture that has normalized the phenomenon of spectacle. So the tools of the YouTuber. So I assume everyone here knows what YouTube is. It's I think, the largest search engine now. It's the largest content generator. It's actually not an open platform. The greatest thing about YouTube is that it's becoming just a studio. It has an algorithm for how people can get money, but it still has the guise of like everyone can be a creator, but it's really now kind of the biggest machine in the kind of ecosystem of the web to get people to provide content and data, bigger than most of the other platforms. And it has a pretty sophisticated mechanism for doing so. As he writes, like there's a YouTube recommendation system, which includes formulas, settings, voices, intention of audience following, endorsement deals, and partner income, sponsored content, and native advertising being the primary modes of brand delivery. The result is the normalization of spectacle. I know Jad and I have children, and we see how yesterday we were with Naram and watching how they know what to do with YouTube and what attracts them and where they go through. And to me, it's pretty fascinating. This is Tyler Oakley. Does anyone know who Tyler Oakley is? Yeah. Okay. We don't normally admit that in public, but that's fine. Tyler Oakley is one of the earliest adopters of the influencer tag on YouTube. And I wanted to show you a couple videos of why YouTube has normalized spectacle, because the elements of YouTube have little to do with like production at the beginning, and they've evolved, right? So that we can see the specific mechanisms and approaches of the platform that embed spectacle culture into advertising and data extraction. Okay, so I'm gonna show two quick videos by the same influencer named Casey Neistat. Probably many of you might know him. And the first one is something he made, a few years ago, maybe 5 or 7 years ago. And pay attention to both the message and the style and the mechanisms that he's using to attract your attention. This is one of the first videos that was an example of like spreadability, of spreadable content. So I'm gonna try to play it here. Oops, sorry. Let's see if this works.
getting a ticket for riding my bike not in the bike lane. Can't believe you're busting my balls. I'm doing the world a favor riding my bike. It's pouring rain out here.
Doing the world a favor.
Yeah, look at this. Look at these assholes. Look at this guy. Double park right here in a bus lane. You're not giving him a ticket.
Guilty, not guilty. Everything you need.
What's the fine?
See, you're a bicyclist, so it's anywhere from $10 up to $130, depending on your record. But it's a bicycle summons. A bicycle summons for not riding in a bicycle lane.
You know.
Lower. The red light summons.
Listen up. As you've been hearing on our show and elsewhere, the police continue to crack down on biking infractions. As the number of bikers explodes throughout the city, ticketing is on the rise. Casey in Manhattan, you got a ticket this month?
Yeah, I got a ticket about 3 weeks ago for riding my bike not in the bike lane.
Not in the bike lane. Alex is holding up a sign that says, you could have just said it.
Oh, okay.
His sign says, not illegal.
Yeah.
I wish I'd known that before I paid the $50 ticket.
Well, so...
Okay, so we're going to show this right away again. So elements that, this was kind of the beginning of the turning point of this kind of influencer content, right? So this is very amateur based. It's kind of, he's a professional filmmaker and he's making this like it's someone just holding a camera, like anybody can do it because the production quality, the means of production has lowered. The ability to create videos like that has become attainable for most people, and YouTube has embedded this influencer style into it, right? So we see that contains like humor, it contains wit, it contains like a public message, it's spreadable, it's funny, it's interesting, and it's about something that people hate, like that people might hate, like getting inappropriate tickets, or when society actually, when society's rules don't match up with the logic of the system infrastructure. So this is a very early video, and this video has this is the normal way in which YouTube has attracted engagement, to have videos that are sensational, that are spectacular, but that are also normalized. So this is a video that the same person who made that made now. And this is really sophisticated. This is where YouTube has gone into what I consider the full normalization of spectacle. So look at the elements and the style. It's very much more refined and professionalized. Try to see if you can spot what this is and who it's made for, okay? So I'm gonna show you, it's another 3 minutes. I want you to try to look at like, who's this made for and what is it? What is this? Is it a video? Is it an advertisement? Is it a promotion? Let's just try to deconstruct this. If you've seen this already, then you win, but don't ruin the answer for everybody, okay? Okay, we'll play this now.
To the haters, the doubters, my 7th grade vice principal.
To everyone who's ever told anyone with a dream they can't, this video's for you. Keep your head down, follow the rules, do as you're told, play it safe. Wait your turn, ask permission, learn to compromise. This is terrible advice. If I were to write an autobiography, a book about my life, one title that would work would be Do What You Can't, because that idea encapsulates everything I've ever done. Like when I wanted to move to New York City and my dad was like, you can't, you don't have any money. Or when I first said I wanted to make movies and it was, you can't, you didn't go to film school. I want to have a TV show, you can't, Casey, you're not pretty enough. And to go even further, like if I were to characterize what this new generation of content creators and filmmakers, what we all do on YouTube and everywhere else is, we do what we can't. I mean, you can.
What's up, you beautiful bastards? What?
This is my first YouTube video ever.
Next thing you know, you're interviewing the president.
I heard that you're going to be out of a job soon.
Well, maybe I'll start a YouTube show
That's
or something
what I'm thinking.
You can't fly around New York City on a magic carpet, but get your electric skateboard, some PVC pipe, a great outfit, give Jesse a call, and you can.
What do you think?
This is gonna be so dope.
You don't need gear, you don't need trucks or a crane, you don't need some big expensive camera rig that never works. When you're a creator, you don't need someone in your ear telling you what you can and can't do.
I'm racing the subway!
What you can and can't say.
I accidentally did the shocker. Oh my God.
They call us gamers, influencers, internet famous.
What the fuck does that mean?
But we know something they don't. You can start a vlog or a makeup channel. Or travel around the world with a gigantic piano playing it in beautiful places for interested people. When you're a creator, all you need is your meetups, collaborations.
It's just two boys and two video cameras.
A life moving so fast and so full, you won't even have time to
Okay. I think we need like a 15-minute break after that to get our senses. Does anyone know what that is? Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Hold on 1 second. I think you need the microphone for the translation.
I think it's just like in social marketing, and it's not advertising, not for a product, but it's for to publish awareness about to give people motivation and to change their negativity.
Okay.
It's somehow an advertising, but for an idea.
Okay. Did anyone else catch? But it's also an advertising for something. Did anyone catch that? Yes. Well, you want me to help with this? There you go.
Actually, when he was promoting for the idea of do what you can, the only mobile phone that was shown is Samsung, not an iPhone. Even when they say it captured the moment or view,
okay.
He was on the screen of a Samsung mobile, and when he said the gear that you want, you need also a mobile phone plus internet plus a good idea.
Right.
The mobile phone was represented was Samsung.
Okay, so it's so thank you, very well done. You get extra credit, Jad. Make sure that happens. It's an ad for Samsung, and then it's an ad for something else. Did anyone else see what it is? Yeah.
I
I think it's an ad for YouTube itself.
Not just YouTube, but YouTube Red.
Yeah.
Right, which is the pay subscription channel. So great, you guys just did a wonderful media literacy deconstruction. That still makes us all want to quit our jobs and just travel everywhere with a GoPro, right? Like I feel like that, and play cool music and be really cool. Right, so this is an advertisement paid for by Samsung and YouTube Red on that platform. And content-wise, if we look at the sophistication of it, it still has elements of being connective, of being amateur, of being we did all these things with a camera in our pocket, and we made ourselves like really amazingly cool. And so this is what I understand as sophistication, the commodification, and the normalization of spectacle. That now, like, we normalize this behavior. Every time we go onto YouTube and look at influencers, and look at what our children are watching, they're people doing these things. Naram's watching people doing crazy basketball tricks and editing and cutting without really a sponsorship, but you're into the platform and you normalize that. So when I said the rigors of the human condition are getting more difficult, this is what I mean. There's that space that's removed. So with media literacy, if we want to have these reasoned deconstructions, it's very hard to do so when this is your platform and that's the mode of content, and then the platform itself immediately diverts you to the next thing, right? So not only is this just end spectacle, this becomes part not only of like consumer and commodity culture, but this is appropriated by like extremist political figures. So in the United States, we have one of these figures that it says, the article is written, far-right activists are stealing tricks from YouTubers and it's going to get people hurt. So these folks that are taking on the guise of journalists, going with the same GoPros and the same video cameras, and they go into places where there's things happening they don't like. And if you read some of this, look at the bottom, like this journalist went into like a protest, I think it was in Italy, around migration issues, and she said like they got it all on film, and then she adopted that approach for her stunts on the road. Show up with a camera, antagonize people, build it up on social media as a live event that her fans can follow at home, then release a summary of the whole thing on YouTube the next day. Her videos are slick. The one about her time in Italy is titled, Have I Lost My Mind? And it opens with 20 seconds of her riding around on a boat full of flares with dubstep playing in the background. Yet she claims that she's a journalist working for an organization. So this is what I consider the normalization of spectacle. We have these large platforms that extract our data and that need us to stay on them, so they give us sensational content, and that has become normalized, right? So that's number one problem that I don't think media literacy has been able to keep up with, okay? Everyone doing okay? Okay, good. The next construct that I think is problematic for how we approach media literacies or how we're connecting as humans is this notion of distrust. So here I'll just tell you a few stories, but this is framed by saying a crisis of trust has been evolving for decades, animated now by alternative media and politicians who openly question the basic function of public institutions, right? So if we normalize spectacular and sensationalized content, we combine that with less trust in institutions and less trust in our societies in general, we kind of start to build up this space of kind of criticality. So this was a study done in 2017, or just published in early 2018, or late 2017, across 28 countries looking at measures of trust. And the study found that across 4 sectors they looked at, government, media, business, and NGOs, that trust in these public institutions was on the decline, and it was most on the decline with media, right? So there's a couple reasons that, that they signal in their research that I think are important to point out. Number one is we no longer, when we spend so much time embedded in these technologies that we consider peer-to-peer, and we get all this validation from these communities that make us feel like our ideas have strength and support and a large following, we don't need institutions as much to focus on. We don't need to trust in these institutions. Why is fake news emerging now, right? So this is, to me, this is not a term we should accept, but it's something that we can talk about, which I talk about as a specific phenomenon of the technological age. and it emerges out of distrust. It does not it's not, fake stories and misreporting have happened since we've had papers, and it was the norm a long time ago, and now it's the norm again. Why is it emerging now? So for me, this is really interesting. I think this is a specific technological age, right? So 3 things, and then I'll share you a couple examples of how this works. Distribution and cost. As we talked about earlier, when the cost of publishing approaches 0, then anyone publishes. Audiences and trust. Given that there's lower costs, reputations are far more expendable, which is what I was just talking about. That you don't need to trust in institutions when audiences and communities form and they're diverse and they're powerful and they're sharing all this valuable information. And then lastly, like they're unregulated, like what I said about those legacy networks at the beginning. They're not regulated, and that's an argument we could have whether they should be or not. But one of the repercussions of the lack of regulation is that you don't have systems set up to like differentiate things. So I think fake news emerges specifically from this. There's a great scholar at Penn State who's he's a psychologist who's been looking at online news and audience perception for a decade, and he wrote this wonderful kind of meta article talking about this idea of like sources and credibility is actually not important to many people. What matters first to people is information that confirms their values. That's what matters first. So in an age where these technologies ask us to keep diverting our attention and flipping from headline to headline, we don't stop and want to say like, is this source credible? Is this credible? If it confirms our value and it has 200 people that already like it, that's pretty much enough for a lot of people to like align with their ideologies. So this idea of like media literacy asking us to stop and slow down and deconstruct, I think it's admirable, and I think we should always be taught it. I don't know if it's as realistic as the digital ecosystem might allow for. Another part of this technological age, so this is to the lack of regulation, right? Like the problem is not fake news, but a digital capitalism that makes it profitable to produce false but click-worthy stories, right? So if anyone's been in a newspaper so the Boston Globe is the newspaper in the city where I live, and I go into that newsroom, and they have all these hardworking journalists, but then they have this thing called Chartbeat, which is like a huge digital board that shows the engagement of all their stories. And they have a team that just like, a team that edits headlines all day to see if the headline will make the story get more clicks or less clicks. That's kind of what they do consistently. And to me, that's really interesting. So this is part of this idea of needing to have things that click, right? So this is a quote that I thought was interesting about in Skopje, about where there was a big fake news farm and industry here, and one of the people who was leading this talked about, you see what people like and you just give it to them. You see that they like water, you give them water. You see they like wine, you give them wine. It's really simple, right? One of our colleagues was just in Mexico City, and he visited a bot farm, which is a guy who had a team of like young people, just like Jad's digital team here, but they were working like night and day just to produce bots to advance information that politicians wanted them to advance in social networks. And this guy showed everything about how it worked, and he said if a politician pays him $10,000, he'll have hundreds of bots up and running, and that politician's name will be at the top. And it will be fake news against somebody and fake news for them. And he's like, this is how you win elections, right? So this is emerging out of a culture of distrust, right? If we don't trust our institutions, and we don't normally talk about sources and credibility anymore. Fake news platforms have become really sophisticated. As you can see, they make up names and there's no regulation, so how do we differentiate? You have to stop and look extensively at this. This is one of my favorite examples of just early fake news, where all the domains in Colombia were being bought up because the country for Colombia is CO. And so like ABC News, this is not really ABC News, it's abcnews.com.co. And Colombia, the government in Colombia said, what's happening? Why are we the most popular domain servicing agency in the world? is because everybody thought that CO is so close to calm that they would just keep buying, right? This is a really cool, I'll show you this. We can see how extensive and expansive fake news has become. This is an algorithm that's collated the most popular. Let me show you this quickly. So here it is. And this is circulated online false news stories. And the bigger the story is and the more prominent the text, the more it's been circulated and the further it's been circulated. So these are the top circulated fake stories of 2017. FBI issues warrant for Obama's arrest after confirming illegal Trump Tower wiretap. So that's one that got a lot of connection. Barron Trump wins National Academic Award. That was shared a lot. That's the president's son. Iceland pays women $5,000 per month to marry immigrants. Democrat principal defecates in front of students during Pledge of Allegiance. Very shareable. Sorry for making you translate defecate. Palestinians recognize Texas as part of Mexico. This is also one. Black Lives Matter thugs block emergency crews from reaching hurricane victims. Is one of the most shared stories that's completely false, right? Illegal immigrants started California wildfires. That's one of the most shared stories that has happened in 2017 without any appropriation. And then here are just a couple of local US stories. But you see how immersive and extensive this can be. So another story of fake news is Pizzagate. Have you guys heard of this Pizzagate story? This was during the run-up to the presidential election when some people who took leaked Democratic emails this is from the platform Reddit, and they created a large ecosystem analytical tool that showed that the Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton was running a sex child ring in the basement of a pizza place in Washington, D.C. And they actually deconstructed it enough that every major media outlet was covering the story. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all the major TV stations. What is it? They were all covering this. They all brought it up, and it actually ended. This is an extreme example. It ended with this person from North Carolina going in to free children into the basement of the pizza place and shooting a gun, and then getting arrested because he didn't find anybody. But the level of distrust that enables this to happen is endemic, right? It's really it's not like just like spectacle. It starts as something novel and then it normalizes. Distrust starts as something like I don't trust, we call this fake news, and it ends like this is a story from a small town in Idaho where there were some Middle Eastern immigrants who were living and working there, and there was a sexual violence crime that happened, and some of the local townspeople started blaming them, even though there was no proof of this, and they didn't do anything. And before the journalists could report on it, it had spread all over the internet. They had their lives risked. People were losing their jobs and having to flee and go into hiding, all because of like rumors starting online in a small town and then leveraging the mechanisms of the web to bring them forward. And then places like the Breitbart and the Drudge Report, these reputable right-wing sites, started to promote it, so it became serious. So this distrust leads to like this level. And of course, as you know, like this has to be legitimized somewhere, right? So I don't know the context in Lebanon much, but this is just a quick 30-second piece about how this gets legitimated.
John Roberts, go ahead, John. No. John Roberts, go ahead. CNN's fake news. I don't take questions. I don't take questions from CNN. CNN is fake news. I don't take questions from CNN. John Roberts of Fox. Let's go to a real. Let's go to a real network. John, let's go.
Well, we're a real network too, sir.
Thank you.
So this is kind of repeated behavior that's become normalized, right? So when you call out the distrust of the public institutions, it creates like a gap in terms of how we try to understand what's true and what's not true, right? So this is the second part. The last part of distrust, I'm going to tell a story about Jad and I. is this idea of algorithms and artificial intelligence. We normally think about algorithms as like ambivalent machines. We talk about it's the algorithm, we like neutralize it, but algorithms are actually made by people sitting down at computers with certain intentions, right? Like Facebook's algorithms are not just neutral. Google's algorithms are not neutral. They're actually made with intention. So I have a funny story from 2013 that I wanted to keep in here. When Jad and I were in Salzburg, this year of 2013, when we were the night before we were flying from Salzburg to Beirut, there was a Turkish Airlines pilot kidnapped when he landed in Beirut. And I was on the next Turkish Airlines flight, and I started to get text messages from my family, my wife and children, saying, oh, you're going to Beirut, he was just kidnapped, what's happening? And she was on Google in the United States, in Boston, and she saw in the news, like, pilot kidnapped in Beirut, and this is 2013, right? So it was a little bit more tensions. There was a lot of disruptions happening in the region. And if you looked at, and this is her Google page, when she did Google News, this is what she got. Turkish pilots kidnapped. Turkish Airlines pilot kidnapped. Gunmen abduct Turkish Airlines pilot. Gunmen abduct 2 airline crew. Beirut gunmen to crew. And all these stories were trying to connect it to some bigger regional thing, right? So this is great. So then we said, let's do some image searching. And when you looked at my image searching for pilots kidnapped in Beirut, this is what I got. Okay, my computer, my algorithm. Then when we go and ask Jad to search pilot kidnapped, this is actually just searching Beirut, not pilots kidnapped. If I did an image search for Beirut from my wife's computer, this is what we get. And then when Jad does it, this is what you get, right? And Jad would explain to me like what this issue is. It has nothing to do with the larger crisis. It's kind of a border thing that happens. The pilot was returned a day or two later. But this is how AI can work, like personalizing information, right? And when it creates these personalizations, we often ask ourselves, right? We know that distrust is hard. Like Disney tracks children via apps, a new lawsuit. This is my favorite story about distrust. This is a slow cooker. You guys know slow cookers? There was a lot of crimes happening where people's data was getting stolen because this thing was Wi-Fi connected, and people would hack in through the slow cooker and then just get into people's systems. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Slow cookers. So slow cookers are avenues. So when we see all these technologies becoming more invasive and more connected, we become less trustworthy. And it ends with this. I'm not going to show this now, but there's some really amazing AI happening where you can recreate speeches in humans. I'm sure some of you have seen this. If not, you can watch this in my slides when I share them. But really sophisticated recreations of real people using AI. So we ask ourselves about trust and distrust, and we see the normalization and evolution of distrust of our institutions because these digital ecosystems aren't concerned with whether or not we trust our governments or whether or not we trust our journalists and media outlets, right? Okay, that's 2. So we've gone over spectacle and we've gone over distrust. And the third thing is this notion of agency gaps. Then after this, I'll tell you how to fix everything. It's going to be awesome. It'll just take me a minute to fix it. So the last thing I want to talk to you about before we look at the solutions is agency gaps. And I think because of spectacle culture and a culture of distrust, a disconnect has emerged between articulating concern and the capacity to act. So if the real goal of media literacy is to, help us think about how to deconstruct and better critique media so that we can be more engaged in our society, I would argue that these social networks have normalized us expressing and sharing concern because that's what they're designed to do, but because they take up so much of our cognitive time and they replace so much of our human connection that we lose the ability to act. We lose the capacity to act because we're engaged in technologies that force us to be continuing to share and express, but the necessary connections and human connectivity to act has been deprioritized because our cognitive space ends up in always needing to share and yell and express. And by act, I don't mean like topple governments or protest in mass ways. I mean to take small reforms and act. So here's the one of the last videos I'll show you. This is a, I should preface this, this is a, done by a graduate student in Penn State, and he mapped every protest, every civic or political protest from 1980, from I think it's like 1981 until 2014. Every time there was a civic or political protest in the world that was covered or shared by some media or news outlet, he mapped it here. And you'll see the dots, and they heat it up. So I want you to look at the evolution of political protest, and I want you to think about the technologies and when they emerged in the context of this protest. So it's the late 70s. So we can look at this, and I'll walk you through once we get to the turn of the 21st century. But just see where the regions are and see where it's heating up and where the protests are. So it's still pretty, the world seems to be kind of protesty, but not really. Then you get into the 90s, and you see some increase in Europe, and the Middle East seems to be always kind of blinking. We can talk about that in another lecture. But then look what happens. So now look at here. So end of the 90s, you get home computers and laptops. Look what happens. 2000, you have the introduction of like search engines and the web comes. Computers become more in people's home. 2001, 2002, you have Google coming about. Search engines become ubiquitous. 2004 is when Facebook gets invented. 2005 is YouTube. 2006 becomes, we get into Twitter, and then we get into Instagram in 2007, then laptops and mobile phones in 2007. Everyone has a smartphone by 2009. What's happening to the world? Everyone now has a phone that's connected and capable. So look at this, the world has gone to hell. Look what's happening. Okay. Thank you for watching. So what happens here in the world? You have a question?
التزايد في المظاهرات هو بسبب وجود التواصل الاجتماعي ولا بسبب ظروف أخرى؟
Is the increase in protests due to social media presence or due to other reasons?
Right. Okay. So the question was: is it due to more social media or just more unrest in the world? So I would argue that it's probably a little bit of both. But I do not think it's just a coincidence that the amount of protests that are mapped coincide with the evolution of specific technologies. Like when everyone has a phone, and the phone, and most all people are on social networks because we know from research that's what everyone does on their phone. And when those social networks are prioritizing people to be sharing and expressing all the time, that I don't know if the world is this unsettled right now or if everyone is always protesting things that are happening. So I would say, for me, it's partly because technologies have become more partisan and polarized, which has then led to people needing to share more. And as a result of that, governments and societies and politicians are also using these technologies to incite more. So it's a little bit of like a feedback loop, or a little bit of both. Did you not just raising your hand this time? Okay.
Yeah. It's also like, if you look at the last 4 years in America regarding the protests that were happening there, most of them were because of people recording incidents on their phones. So it's not maybe just an increase of the situation, maybe it's just an increase of media covering for these situations. Like the Black Lives Movement didn't happen until people started using their phones to record cops beating black individuals, and similar stuff around the world.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Like in the United States, you know, it's not all of a sudden that we had serious crimes and killings of black men. It's because these technologies allow people to capture it and share it in real time. And I think that's what you're seeing here, right, is the ability for us to capture and share. So my argument here for the last of these problems is we have societies that gather in concern, and we have technologies that promote and extend this concern, right? And that we are spending so much time sharing our concern, that sometimes we are exchanging that with the capacity to act. And so just in the last 5 minutes I have here, this is Wael Ghonim, who you guys probably all know from his role in the early MENA uprisings and in organizing some of the Facebook pages, right? So I'm not as interested in his story as I am in what he said about his experience with technologies and social technologies and the influence they had. He said this, he has a new book out and a recent talk where he said, I once said, if you want to liberate a society, all you need is the internet. I was wrong. The same tool that united us to topple dictators eventually tore us apart. And I summarized his 5 main reasons. And these things, I think, contribute to an agency gap. We don't know how to deal with rumors. They spread too fast, right? So you can't, that's like, that idea is that we don't know how to stop and deflect. We've talked about that. We tend to only communicate with people that we agree with. This is the design of networks to put us in like together with people we agree with. Online discussions quickly descend into angry mobs. I don't know if anyone has, it's a wonderful sociological experiment to just start reading down the comments of any political post anywhere and to see what happens to the comments. They become quite extreme, quite quick. Yes, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question about freedom of speech.
Yep.
One Lebanese diplomat I heard on the news is now suing citizens for saying something that he considers to be, defamatory or I'm really concerned. What if I say something that somebody doesn't like and then they can sue me? Are there any rules, any laws, any codes so far about this?
Right. So I'm not a free speech or legal expert, but like there is, I think that would depend quite specifically on your country, but and the laws that govern free speech in your country. But what's interesting about the internet is that in the UK they had this GDPR thing in the EU right now, which is trying to protect the privacy of everybody. In the United States, we try to apply the First Amendment to social technologies. It doesn't work so well. But part of the problem in this freedom of speech is that these things cross borders and cross cultures all the time, and there's no global regulatory body that can associate this. I don't know. Jad might know more about how this is regulated in terms of free speech in Lebanon, or maybe some of the other local professors or citizens here.
Is it considered like regular media? I mean, if I go on YouTube, is it a personal thing or is it public?
I don't know. Well, yeah, we can discuss this after when I finish this point. So the last 2 points, we are forced to jump to conclusions, he writes, because we don't have time to stop and, like this again, the rigors of the human condition. And then our digital experiences favor broadcasting over engagement, posts over discussions, and shallow commitment over deep interaction. We talk at and not with. So to me, this is a really powerful set of conditions for why we have this disconnect between how much we share our concern and what the capacity to act is. Okay, so in the conclusion, I'm just going to leave the conclusion of my book a mystery so that you have to kind of figure it out yourself. I just thought about that now. I ask you guys, so in this space we have this distrust, we have spectacle, distrust, and then we have this disconnect between how much we care about concern and how much we actually act. And in conclusion, I ask, what happens when we build media literacies that prioritize the values of human connectivity? And so my argument is that in this culture, in the context of these norms of digital culture, we need to think about how we build media initiatives and interventions, not in terms of the processes, where are we accessing, how do we analyze, how do we create, reflect, and act, but in terms of values that reassert the human in technologies, like something I call technologies of gathering. Like, where do technologies reinforce and support human elements? And I put up a set of value constructs that I think this term civic media literacies would support. And these are things like caring and persistence and critical consciousness, emancipation, and imagination. So that if you think about anything, any media intervention that is about civic engagement and community engagement. What I've noticed is that when people are successful at reforming things on a daily level or having impact in their communities, they start from a set of values, and then they use media to conform with those values. They start from this personal approach, and then they build these processes into the values. So this sees media literacy as civic renewal, right? Media literacy, the goal is to replace a vicious cycle of citizens' disempowerment and public corruption with a virtuous cycle of re-engagement and reform, right? So this should be the way that we think about media literacy. This shouldn't be about, in this space where technologies prioritize spectacle and they sensationalize and they always keep you diverted, the goal should be to re-engage in something that's local, something that's meaningful, something that's tangible. Civic media literacies have three contexts. They prioritize processes before technologies. It's not about the platform, but it's about the process. They prioritize people over products. So it's not about that video, it's about the people you want to engage and how you engage them. And they prioritize values over skills. So we think about how do we care for something and why, and then what are the ways we can use media to connect people around that instead of the skills of connection, right? So this is what civic media literacies do. This is how they work. And so each one of these, caring ethic, there are examples which I can show you. Critical consciousness, there are stories of how young people use media. So caring, we talk about Standing Rock and what values went into their protecting of their land. Critical consciousness, we talk about a 9-year-old in Scotland who was trying to reform school lunches and had an amazing media campaign to do this, but the values of that were based in her ability and need to reform from a situation with which she was stuck. Civic imagination, Henry Jenkins, who came to talk here a few years ago, talked about we cannot change the world unless we imagine what a better world might look like. How do we imagine better futures and then use the internet? Harry Potter Alliance and Superman used in imaginative ways to re-engage civic society. And lastly, persistence. The story of one artist, street artist, who painted these carochas, which are the recycling carts, for years, and then started a campaign that gave health services and benefits to the people who pushed these and recycled all around. And then emancipation from systems that oppress. So we were in Salzburg the last 3 weeks, and there's Jad in the back somewhere. I don't know if you guys see him. Oh, where is he? Right there? He's got both. Who's that? You? That's you? You see yourself too? So this idea about like, how can we use media to emancipate ourselves? And it doesn't mean we have to try to change the world. What it means in our context is that you can put 100 people in a room and ask them to care for each other and to use their imagination and persist to free themselves of current constraints of a problem. And it's that gathering that I think media literacy focuses on. It's not just about media, it's about connecting culture, it's connecting art, it's connecting people. And these are your beautiful students here. And then some old guy somewhere back here, where is he? Not in this picture, good. That we can actually do this, right? That like civic media literacies rethink the functions of media in terms of communities, communication, information needs in order to understand the complex and multidimensional roles of citizens that citizens media can actually have. And so I'll leave you with this quote, but thinking about the constraints of media literacy and the power that we can use media for if we prioritize the values of human connection over the skills of media use. So thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it. And I think there's some, we have about 5 or 10 minutes left for questions. If anyone would like to ask a question. We have.
First of all, thank you so much for this interesting presentation and for this interesting book. Regarding the part that, the example you mentioned about the algorithms and everything related to the artificial intelligence integration, I was wondering, and I don't have an answer for this, if algorithms can influence the way people can participate in online activism or the online political participation somehow, and can even interfere with the results of the online voting and the indicators that we can get out of this, and this can be relevant to the US presidential election somehow or not?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So algorithms definitely have the power to play, I mean, they already do. So the example that's now kind of well understood, if you think about the US election, is actually how foreign agencies infiltrated our social platforms to prioritize certain content over other. That's been proven, and they learned how they've learned how to promote the algorithm to work in their favor. So you can, whether it impacts like actual voting or online voting is something that's yet to be like confirmed, but there's definite proof that the algorithms can shift what information gets put in front of people and what information doesn't. And so so I guess my answer to that is that yes, they already do that. And the potential with algorithms for civic action taking is more of like, it's almost like there's this book called Program or Be Programmed. And I don't think it's realistic that everyone, like, they don't give away algorithms. But the more you understand about how they're constructed and the functions, the better that they can be manipulated in your favor. And that's kind of, I think that's the most important thing that we can consider in this. The other thing to consider with algorithms is that algorithms become commodified quite quickly. Like the whole internet runs on algorithms, basically. It's people making programs to prioritize certain things over another. And that is kind of problematic, which is why I always say if you ever want to have like a media, if you're doing anything with activism and media, a lot of people fail when they start by like, let's put things on YouTube. They should start by like connecting with people around the issue that they want and then figure out what media to use and how, because then the algorithms don't get in the way as much as they might if you just start by being beholden to the platform itself.
Maybe this will be played on the online political forums or something like Facebook groups or something that are mainly aim at discussing a certain topic or being an activist towards or against a certain like public cause or something. I mean, like connecting this to certain political forums or online groups, and if the participants don't have a knowledge about this or enough awareness about this, this will influence democracy at some point of time.
It already has. I don't think that it will. I think that's what happened, and that's why there's this big uproar over these platforms, and they're being fined and testified in Congress. So, yeah, I think it already has, and there has to be a way for more transparency. This is where regulation becomes important, because this is what has been happening. And so some people want more regulation, and some people want to break up these big tech companies that use their algorithms so powerfully. I don't know if either is realistic, but I think it will happen at some point.
So this should be added to the media and information literacy curriculum and to be one of the important topics that can be discussed.
Yep, algorithmic literacy, understanding AI, yes, I think that's right. Yeah.
Thank you.
شكرا دكتور بول على هذه المحاضرة، أو كاظم الساهر الأمريكي إذا أحببت أن أسميك بهذا الاسم.
Thank you.
شكرا لك. سؤالي هو، تحدثت في النقطة الأولى عن أنه فيسبوك يعني بالإمكان أن يسيطر على، خلينا نقول على الأشخاص أو على الأفراد، وتكون هنا التربية الإعلامية قاصرة أمام مواجهة بعض القضايا اللي مهيمنة فيسبوك أو العديد من الشركات المتعلقة بمواقع التواصل الاجتماعي على الأشخاص. فما هي الحلول باعتقادك لمواجهة هذه المواقع وهذه القضايا اللي مواقع التواصل الاجتماعي بشكل عام هي السيطرة على الأشخاص أو الأفراد.
So thank you for your question, and thank you for the compliment. I appreciate that. So the question about Facebook is an interesting one because it's not, the responses are not, so I guess at this point in our time, we know this, a couple things, that younger people and younger generations are not using Facebook as much because they've realized how kind of corrupted and commodified it has become. And I would say for us, it's almost about the more you understand, so the more you see Facebook as like a commodified and corrupt space, the more restraint you might have from using it, and the more kind of context you might have from using it. I no longer think, I think Facebook can be used like, so for example, the Salzburg students use Facebook to post really nice things when it's finished. I think that's what Facebook is really good for. And I think, you know, one example would be like to try to separate out your personal use on Facebook from anything that's kind of political or public, because Facebook is somewhat less value. Event management, promotion of certain things happening, personal experiences.
Facebook for as the company is that, and we use it for social media holiday posts.
Right.
Very basic photo albums and events.
Right.
But day-to-day stuff, people usually favor Twitter and Instagram.
Right, that's right. And we know from the Mexican bot farms that Facebook is it's still used with older generations in a kind of corruptible way. So I would almost, at this point, I would say you either stop using it or you just use it for personal reasons, and then, you know, remove remove as much as you can the kind of political, because it's not designed for that, and it actually kind of confuses as much as it creates clarity. So that's what I've started talking about. And until they regulate it, nothing's going to change. I understand the human pull of Facebook, but I think if you can compartmentalize it as a personal thing, it's much more healthy.
الموضوع الأول تكلمتم عن تأثير استخدام وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي على الديمقراطية. حاب أعرف إنه هل هذا التأثير من يعني إيجابي أم سلبي وكيف؟ الطلب الثاني في سلايد كان يتكلم عن الثقة ما بين السياسيين وما بين في طبعا كان رسم بياني، فإذا ممكن يعني إذا في بالإمكان إنه ترجع لنا على أساس نأخذ صورة للسلايد نفسه. ما لحقتش إني آخذ.
كل السلايدز حيكونوا موجودين على الويب سايت.
بس السؤال اللي هو التأثير استخدام وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي على الديمقراطية، هل هو سلبا أم إيجابا وكيف؟ إذا ممكن.
Right. So this again, this study was done. I can share the report with you. Over 28 countries. So the question is one that we would need hours to answer. I would say that social media, my argument in this is that like anything over time that begins as novel and grows, it becomes commodified, and once it becomes commodified in the marketplace, the consequences end up being more critical than they were opportunistic. So the argument is that in the early days, social media like Facebook and Twitter, I think they had more potential to bring more people together around causes, and they still do that. But because the Facebook algorithm has become so commodified, that I would argue, and because it was commodified with no values in mind, that it became, and this is not for every election, but if you look at elections in the United States, or if you look at elections in France, or the control of Facebook in some countries, like maybe Turkey, for example, that it became more harmful for the democratic process because they were allowing people to manipulate the information without transparency. There was no control over it. So anybody who was trying to have any financial gain could manipulate without transparency. So going back to I'm just fascinated by this by recently, but in Mexico City, the person that one of our colleagues had spent days with, who was running this bot farm, said that he generated tens of millions of impressions in the United States in support of Donald Trump. And these were purchased by like small alternative political and media groups in the United States that were just filling offshore bank accounts. And he was running like invasive bot farms across all these social media in the United States. When this happens to social media platforms, again, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but I think this is an evolution of a market function in the platforms that can be more corrupting than can it be beneficial. So I still think it's not yes or no, but I just think we've gotten to a point where these networks are so commodified that they've lost any type of value system. They've lost novelty. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so do you want to do this as the last question? Okay, we can do this question, then one more, and then we can break. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, okay, so my question was, what's the alternative? I mean, it took so many years for Facebook to have this very big network to enable to connect people. I mean, the Arab Spring and stuff like that, how to like connect different groups through this infrastructure. So if we say, okay, Facebook is bad now, what's the alternative? Like, someone needs to provide something else, or like
just go to Instagram. It's way cooler.
Yeah, but it does not like it's mainly visual stuff.
Right. Well, I would say that the goal is not like there's one side of it which is just like the casual user. Like I'm saying that like for like civic purposes or for political purposes, like this like Facebook is still a platform that can connect. Facebook, like, it can still promote things. It's a good space for expression, culture. Like, those things I think Facebook can still be useful for. Again, my argument is not, like, everything Facebook about our whole lives. Like, there are certain things that I don't think should ever happen on Facebook, like posting photos of young people because they collect and extract so many data. Like, that can be harmful. Posting things about, like, identity and personal, like, that trade-off is always there, and that privacy is always at risk. I think for like my argument is that like if this is all about like for civic and political engagement, that we don't opting into the Facebook platform has been more corrupting than not. So if we want to reform anything, we don't start with like Facebook. You start with what you want to do and who you want to do it with, and then if Facebook becomes meaningful, you can still use it. But that we don't just buy into the platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't criticizing the argument. I was just asking, where do you see the solution?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think the solution is that Facebook will, well, my guess is within certain time, Facebook will phase out as like the place, and it already is. Like if you look at like engagement with younger generations, that Facebook, I don't know if anyone's in here, but Facebook already is on its way down. And I think the solution will be that there will be new networks that will come as novel and immersive, and then they'll have to struggle with market models. So I don't really know what the solution is in terms of like where you go, but something will emerge after. Or like the Instagram is really interesting because that's not really used it's not yet been corrupted in that political of a way. So that's a really interesting platform that's like kept separate. Maybe they'll have to regulate the political information on these platforms from the personal. That might be another form of regulation. So I'm not sure what exactly the solution is, but there's a number of potential directions if you go in. Okay, so we have one more question there, and then we can wrap up.
زميلة احنا من تجربة بدنا نحكي يمكن على الفئة العمرية الأصغر وتحديدا طلاب المدارس استخدام تطبيق الفيسبوك هو الأجدى لأنه احنا يمكن عبر صفحاتنا سواء على الفيسبوك أو تويتر نجد أن هناك تفاعل أكبر على صفحات الفيسبوك. لكن إذا سمحت دكتور، إذا ما عدنا إلى السلايد تجد عدم الثقة في الميديا، لكن هل ترى أن السبب الرئيسي من الحكومة ولا من البزنس يعني متوازن مع بعض؟ يعني هل هي سبب رئيسي عدم الثقة بالحكومة أو تأثير المال والبزنس والتمويل في الإعلام والإعلان؟ شكرا يا سيدي.
Thank you for the question. I think so. Again, I think it's not like a black or white. So Facebook, as like something that gathers groups, you know, like school children or a community is fine. I think the major distrust though has come out of the monetization of the platforms and the way that they're designed. So I think that this distrust is because research shows that so many people are in these alternative networks where they have information coming that's supported by many of their peers, and we know from research that something that a peer tells you is far more credible than something a media outlet tells you. So, for example, if you look at Amazon, the number one way that people recommend, the number one people that make any choices is through their peer recommendations, not through like what the companies tell you. And media suffers a different fate, but a similar one. And I think that's largely because the technology companies realized they could sell the most advertising by getting the most people to like things. And when they got into politics, it went like through the roof. When they were just talking about like cars or candy, it was good, but once they got into the political game and made arrangements with news organizations, it went from being a small jump to a big jump, and that's when the distrust started in a large way. So I do think it's because of this function that their model just kind of pushed us too far into that one way. So I'm happy to talk to anyone else who has questions after this, but thank you again for the time, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of MDLAB. Thank you.